Okay, lesson 15. But before we start, did you do your homework? You forgot already, huh? Your homework was to study the energy whirls that occur when you need to go to the toilet. It's a joke, but actually it's not. Because that is what energy is. And it's so clear if you pay attention. Okay, Svadhistana Chakra. Svadhisthana means the seat of the self. The previous chakra, Muladhara, had a developmental stage between birth and the age of 7. That is for most people a time of which there is no memory. Unless traumatic experiences occur at a young age, then memory comes back. Developmental stage of Svadhisthana chakra is between 8 and 14. That is why children around the age of 7, 8 start to spend time in front of the mirror. They become self-conscious. They become critical of their appearance. They become sensitive to what other people think of them, other people's opinion, other people's judgment. So that is the chakra manifesting. But in yoga, we distinguish two of these developments where self-consciousness occurs. The first one is natural and everybody goes through it. That is the stage, developmental stage between the age of 8 and 14. We call that self with a small s. We just become self-conscious, but not in a sophisticated way and not in a way of which we speak when we talk about soul consciousness. Self-awareness with a capital S. The yoga practitioner or practitioner of any other form that leads to sattva goes through the second stage of self-consciousness, of self-conscious becoming. And that's where you go far beyond the first stage of self-consciousness, where you actually start to become aware. You start to become aware of the self with a capital S. We start to become aware of our heart content. Self-consciousness with a capital S leads to people developing soul consciousness. So you go beyond what you have been conditioned to think and to do, conditioned by your parents, teachers, society, the government, the media. You go beyond that and you gradually come in touch with who you really are and what you really want to do in this life. That is, of course, a gradual process, and it is a process where you're often being thrown back and forth between your old conditioning and your new self-consciousness, without initially being able to distinguish exactly which is which. Again, this is bringing us to the battle between the head and the heart. people invariably ask me how I came to Korea. It started with yoga. It started with becoming self-conscious. Many people find it impossible or difficult or even crazy to think of doing what I did. Not just moving to another country, but leaving everything behind, staying long term, even giving up my own nationality, taking on another nationality, not knowing about what the future will bring. So people wonder, how is this possible? Why would somebody do this? If I rationalize it, I do think that I'm crazy. But I know that I have been able to do all this, that I have been driven, motivated, driven, fueled to do all this by what I feel in my heart. In my heart is what I really want to do with my life, which is fueled by my past, by karma. These are things that slowly manifest in the practitioner of spirituality that develops a consciousness of the self with a capital S. Svadhistana, the seed of the self. The translation of Svadhisthana is the seed of the self. We will come back to this theme again and again, because this is one of the big or silver linings in what yoga really is about. It's a silver lining, it's an important aspect, and yet most yoga practitioners and teachers included do not realize the importance of this aspect, and if addressed at all, it's addressed in a very superficial way. Let's have a look at the details of the chakra. The subtle element is water. So you see the Sanskrit word for subtle element is tamatra. You see the word matra there. Matra is matter. So the manifestation into matter is water. Remember the previous chakra, the tamatra, manifestation into matter was earth. So we have earth, water. The subtle vehicle of action, and you see there the Sanskrit word karmendriya, karma. Karma means do. So in this case, action. The subtle vehicle of action, or the function of the chakra, the physical function, is reproduction. The Jnanendriya, subtle organ of perception, Jnana is perception. So taste, in this case, the Jnanendriya is taste, sight, smell, touch, hearing. These are the Jnanendriyas as we know them, the 5. The subtle energy is Samana Prana. The color belonging to this chakra is orange, and the mantra is Vam. Vibration is Vam. The chakra is responsible for the functioning of the lower desires such as jealousy, greed, and desire in general, which often manifest in a negative way or violating the yamas as we know them, yamas and niyamas. But it's also responsible for saving, preserving, social mindedness, playing, and creativity. Many children in this developmental stage start collecting things, collecting bottle caps, or collecting post stamps, or soccer cards, or baseball cards, but also children who are a little bit active, so to speak, they start with their first job. Not in the sense of a serious job, but they start looking for opportunities to earn a quarter, to earn a buck or two, washing a car, mowing the lawn, doing chores in return for receiving some pocket money. That's all related to Svadhistana Chakra. Another development that takes place is the becoming aware of the self in relation to the opposite sex. Can be the same sex if you have a tendency towards homosexuality, but it's the same principle. In the previous 7 years of development, you're very selfish, not in a negative way, but in your own cocoon, stable, security, all these elements that we talked about last week, safety, stability and security, are all very important in that stage, with no consciousness of the self generally, if there are no traumatic experiences, and no concern for the world around us and the people around us. But at this stage we start to look at the world around us, compare ourselves, but we also start to develop an attraction towards the people around us, and specifically in combination with eroticism. We start to develop eroticism and an attraction towards other people based on that. Exercises that activate this chakra are particularly exercises where you bend the hips. Remember, from the very beginning of this course, I have hammered home the message: when you do asana, do it correctly. Instead of bending the spine, work with the hips. Pursue to keep the back straight and focus on the hips. That is because of this. Because it looks like a physical exercise, but what you're really doing is energy work. You're generating and stimulating energy. So when you bend the back, it's not very effective in stimulating energy. Keeping the back straight and focusing on the tilt of the pelvis, sideways, forward, that is where it really starts to have a deep effect. This is the second chakra from the bottom. Last week I haven't mentioned yet which exercises stimulate Muladhara chakra because the picture was still very vague. But each chakra is stimulated by different exercises. This chakra particularly by hip bending exercises. Muladhara chakra is particularly stimulated when we spread the feet, when we spread the legs. Triangle poses, we have the standing poses at first. Later you will have also seated poses where you spread the feet, spread the legs. So spreading the legs particularly stimulates Muladhara chakra. Bending the hips, often you have combinations, so you stimulate both chakras. Bending the hips then stimulates Svadhistana chakra, and you will see after the break that Manipura chakra is then stimulated by adding another element to your asana. Sattva characteristics of people who have relative sattva in this chakra show characteristics like graceful and smooth movements, emotional maturity, flexibility, physical as well as mentally, emotional flexibility, and ability to accommodate changes, which is a form of flexibility. The Rajas characteristics are rigid, easily addicted, very emotional, emotionally dependent, and attached. Do you recognize these characteristics? Artists come to mind. Real artists. People who are artists by nature, they are so because of Rajas in Svadhistana Chakra. That leads to them, their ability to express emotions. So real art is expression of emotions. Invariably, artists, almost all, there are exceptions. Picasso, for example, is an exception. But almost invariably, all artists suffer with substance abuse, addictions, very violent is not the right word, very unstable relationships, love relationships, falling in love, and then creating beautiful art, and then crashing into a deep depression and conflict. Early death. Most artists die prematurely because of substance abuse, unhealthy habits, life habits, suicide also, out of sheer desperation, not being able to cope with the overload of emotions, committing suicide. Overdoses of drugs, alcohol. So this brings us to a very interesting point. Maybe you have read the handout and you see that Carl Jung has made some interesting observations in this respect. I'd like to read a quote from Carl Jung, the one before the last paragraph. He wrote, "Emotion is the chief source of all becoming conscious. There can be no transforming of darkness into light and apathy into movement without emotion." You understand what is being said here? You understand the importance of emotion for us as spiritual practitioners? Emotion is life. Emotion is energy, vitality. We live in a world where people who are deemed emotional are deemed unstable. We look at it in a negative way. According to yoga, according to Carl Jung, a very famed psychologist and philosopher at that, emotion is crucial in the functioning of a human being. And what we do with yoga is awakening consciousness. Carl Jung draws our attention towards consciousness, turning darkness, which is ignorance, the lack of consciousness in most human beings, turning darkness into light. Light is wisdom, consciousness, crown chakra, which we know is fueled by energy. Energy that does not appear naturally. Yogis and other spiritual practitioners fuel the crown chakra in a rather balanced way, in a measured way. But there are people who are born with those large amounts of energy. They are the ones that naturally become artists, start expressing themselves when growing up in music and other forms of art. But because they don't have a control mechanism, they become very unstable. The characteristics of real artists is instability, emotional instability, which is a stage that every yoga practitioner also goes through temporarily. Most yoga practitioners temporarily experience a period of emotional instability, increased emotions, emotionality. And you think, what the hell is happening with me? I feel like crying all the time. I practice yoga every day. Am I not supposed to feel more peaceful, more calm, more in control of my emotions? Yeah, in the long term, you will indeed. But it is because of the generation of energy as a result of your yoga practice, it is accompanied by the manifestation of emotions that you haven't experienced before or haven't experienced in such a strong way before. So this is, for us, this is very important to understand. Because we live in a world where emotion is not appreciated, is frowned upon, is considered as a negative matter, is considered as something that we must oppress. Now, yoga is a science of control, but it is absolutely not a science of oppression. Some people conflate the two. Control is oppression, isn't it? People think. But that's not the case. They could be considered opposites. Because oppression means not allowing it to manifest, not even acknowledging it, denying it, ignoring it, which is how many people grow up and are taught by their parents, by society that doesn't tolerate emotions. Yoga says, no, emotions are good, do not ignore them. In fact, they are crucial if you want to evolve, if you want to grow, if you want to develop. Because emotions tell you everything you need to know about yourself. Self with a capital S also. But what we need to do with emotions is learn from them, observe them. Try to connect the dots, because emotions teach you about your past. Your past shapes your present. And if you don't take control, it will also shape your future, your destiny. This is why yoga promises you in the long term that you will be able to determine your own destiny. That sounds weird, and everybody thinks, well, I'm the boss, I'm free, I'm the boss, I decide what I do with my life. But on a deeper psychological level, emotional level, our past determines our future. Because our past determines how we think, but also, if we are unconditioned by something like yoga, we have a tendency to stay stuck in emotions we experienced long time ago. Traumatic experience, emotional experiences. And they become a prison. They limit us from moving forward into the future. And so, if you understand how this works, and you understand somebody's past, you will be able to predict somebody's future based on their past. You will eventually start to see your real self, self with a capital S, Sva, which is a picture of the entirety of you, including your past experiences. Based on that, you can then see where you are going, and if you don't like that, you can block it and choose to go another direction. And this is the story of how I came to Korea. I started this lecture by saying, people always ask me, how did you come to Korea? What made you come to Korea? What made you stay in Korea? I started practicing yoga. That is where the change began. I started to connect with myself, and I started to see, based on my understanding of my past, I started to see where I was going, and I didn't like it. Because I saw myself going in the same direction as my siblings were going, some of whom have died prematurely. And I decided that is not where I want to go. It started with yoga, connecting with the self, seeing the past, and based on that, being able to predict the future. You are already in the process of doing so. Maybe you do not realize it yet, because it is a gradual and subtle process, but it is undeniable. And it happens because yoga generates sattvic energy, leading to harmony in this chakra, which is responsible for those developments. Can you see the miracle that yoga is? The wonder that yoga is? And how sad it is, in fact, that millions of people are practicing yoga without the benefit of yoga. Because they do not practice yoga in such a way that it leads to sattva. And people have no idea how deep yoga really affects us, but also teaches us how we can control ourselves, not only in the present, but into the future. Tamas characteristics, which is what you see in many people, artists, there are not so many, because rajas is not so common. Tamas, however, is common, and that is showing rigidity in body and attitude, difficulty with social skills, fear of change, and lack of passion, which is the opposite of emotion. Passion is emotion, raw emotion. Allow yourself passion, because passion fuels your spiritual development. The problem is, it often ends in conflict, disasters. The picture of the artist always struggling with substance abuse, with high running emotions, at one moment being very high and at another moment being very low, down, depressed. So what a real artist needs is not a bottle of whiskey or wine, but yoga. And you see successful artists that live a long life, usually live like yogis. They live rather isolated lives. They live like hermits. They are eccentric and very determined in the way they want to live their lives. They protect your most precious asset, not only as a yogi but as a human being, is your energy. A mature, stable artist understands that and protects their most precious assets, say, simply by kind of isolating themselves. They live in a cave, not really. Often these stable artists are successful. They earn a lot of money, so they will just buy a house somewhere in an isolated place where they can just be themselves, where they can create, but also where they are protected from harm. Their precious asset, which is energy, can easily be affected by outside influences. You will see when we start reading the Hatha Yoga Pradipika that one of the things that the Hatha Yoga Pradipika warns you for is to stay away from people. The more sensitive you are, the more you have to stay away from people. Strange, huh? You will very naturally become more selective. Not only about people, about everything in life. That's why I always jokingly say that my life is very boring. Life of a yogi is boring. But I always say it with a smile. I don't need a bucket list with 100 things to pursue before I die. Life every day in itself is challenging and exciting enough. And when people say, how is it going? I say boring, but stable, because boring is stable. Funny, huh? We live in a world where everybody is competing to have the greatest adventures, the most exciting experiences, etc. If you are on the spiritual path, you will realize that living like that is very distracting, not only distracting, very disturbing. And you will just in a very natural way, gradually isolate yourself to some extent, because you need that. Can you follow this a little bit? Your most precious asset is energy, which is responsible for the crown chakra functioning, which is responsible for you connecting with your heart's content or having soul consciousness. Whenever there are distractions, you become restless because while distracted, you feel also disconnected. A condition you didn't possess before, so you were not disturbed. The more sensitive you become, the more conscious you become, the more you become disturbed because the slightest distraction, activity, people's actions, not just disturbs you, but causes disconnect. And that makes you want to connect as soon as possible. So over the years, I've heard from my students, I heard people saying, yeah, but you know, what is now? People ask me to come over in the weekend, have a couple of beers or watch a football game or go out for a meal. And sometimes I enjoy it, but more and more I just want to stay home. So is there something wrong with me? And the answer is no. It's showing that what you are doing, your yoga practice, is actually really working. It's leading to the opening up of the crown chakra, increasing consciousness. So in the beginning you feel conflicted about it because you think maybe you need a shrink, you need a psychiatrist, something is wrong with you. But that's not the case. It is an expected development. So try to feel it in a way that you're not becoming an obstacle for yourself because you think that there's something wrong with you. Start learning to enjoy it, rather. Solitude. People speak about loneliness. I like to speak about solitude because loneliness sounds negative. Solitude is something that we need. And of course, we try to find the balance. Being a yogi in the way that it is meant to be, developing consciousness, increased sensitivity, which is only possible with increased levels of energy, which is inevitably, unavoidably connected with increased emotionality, and with that possible emotional instability. It's all part of the process. But it leads to vulnerability in a world full of predators. There are many insensitive people, unconscious people, unscrupulous people that don't think anything of harming others if it is in their own interest. That is the world that we live in. Many people oppress their emotions because they don't want to be vulnerable. Many people who have been hurt in the past, and we all have, haven't we? They stop expressing themselves to avoid becoming hurt again. What yoga is teaching us is that we must allow ourselves our vulnerability, otherwise we kill our spirit. That energy is important, but it comes with a package of sensitivity, vulnerability. And the way that we deal with that is by becoming selective. You live your life the way you are used to, but you notice there are situations or people in situations where you come across, where you are exposed, and people don't think anything of it but to jump on you and to hurt you. Instead of oppressing or not expressing anymore, we become selective, and along the way we learn where we can expose ourselves and where we cannot. Sitting here before you, I'm doing just that. Do you realize that? With everything that I tell you, the deepest personal experiences that I wouldn't even discuss with my siblings or my mom or my best friends for that matter, I put it all out here. Why? It's my passion to teach. And if I oppress that, by holding back, by not telling you what I really want to tell you, then my lectures will become very dry and very boring. I'll probably just end up reading the text from the paper or a book, which is what many teachers do. What I do, I put my heart and soul into it. But you are a select number of people that have chosen to come here. Because when you came across my advertisement or when you talked with your friends about when they have done this course, what they experienced, you felt something. You felt a click. There was a chemistry, there was a connection, and you thought, this is something I have to explore. I feel some potential for me, for my future life. So you come here. And you make yourself just as vulnerable as I do. Heart to heart, literally. That is this energy. And being selective. Because when I am in a coffee shop or with the dogs on the riverside with other people with their dogs, I don't communicate them with them in the way that I do with you. They wouldn't be able to handle it, or they wouldn't even understand what it is about. Bing, pin drop. Try to find something in your life that you're passionate about. It may not be your work. Most people are not really passionate about their work. But something interesting will happen. If you haven't liked your work actually really much, you might actually start becoming passionate about that job. Because your yoga practice leads you to connect with the essence of what your job really is about. While it started as a way of making money to pay the bills and to start planning for the future, you might actually start becoming aware of what it really is about, and then actually become passionate about it. I remember very clearly from the days that I was studying with Ajita. I studied with Ajita for 7 years, so I have seen many fellow students. Most of them were actually highly educated. Doctors, lawyers, architects. Most people also, like here, do not come to class to become a teacher. They come to learn something, for personal growth, development. What I saw happening is that people started putting heart into their profession. The lawyers, who first only cared about status, they started actually caring about the people that they were paid to defend in court. Architects, instead of wanting to just build the biggest building and get the most expensive contracts from the government and big business, they actually started designing smart buildings that were energy efficient and contributed to the well-being of the people that actually have to live and work in those buildings. And interestingly, it is an investment, but it leads to higher productivity, lower sick percentages of people getting sick. People start putting heart into the work that they started doing for the wrong motives. And if you find that difficult, you will find a hobby on the side, something that you're passionate about. And your job is then something that allows you to pursue that hobby. Remember, based on this subject, Svadhistana Chakra, emotion is not something to be ignored or oppressed. Emotion is very valuable, in contrast with what the world around us wants us to believe. But we need to treat it in a rather delicate way. Protect our most important, most precious asset, which is energy, energy is not possible simply without emotion. So you want to become an artist with yoga as a stability tool. Questions about Svadhistana? Okay, let's have a short break. I will explain the new Kriya exercise after asana practice.